All right. Well, good afternoon. Great lunch, eh? Woohoo! Yeah, no sleeping you guys in the front here. I'm watching you guys. All right, so we've had some great presentations on soil this morning. Mike, that was excellent. Really enjoyed that. Sarah as well. And we'll carry on a little bit more, but now you know some things, so I thought it might be a good time for a pop quiz. You ready for a pop quiz? Yes. Your head's saying yes, your body's saying no. We're going to drive on, though. We'll start really simple. What is soil? How would you define soil? So just shout it out. Don't wait a long time. How would you define soil? What is soil?
Alive.
It's alive.
Life.
It's life.
Sand, silt, clay.
Sand, silt, clay.
Complex.
Complex. Yeah, lots of good stuff. And this is one definition. You know, we don't have to get stuck on a definition. But I kind of like to say it's the stuff on the top of the earth that food grows in. So, you know, we can keep lots of definitions, but I think the one thing it's important to say, and somebody alluded to it this morning, that it's not dirt. So if you ever get asked what is soil, don't answer the question and say it's dirt, because that's the wrong answer. All right, what makes up 50% of soil? Or in a good soil, what would make up 50%? Yeah? Air and water, bingo. You guys know your stuff. So air and water, you want that pore space in there. That would be at least 50%. So an average soil might have that. It might have 45% or so mineral material. And then, of course, you've got your organic matter. Class 1, if you may know, there's something called the suitability or capability rating of soils. It goes classes 1 to 7. And generally, classes 1 to 3 are what we do most our agriculture on. Beyond that, it would be mostly unsuitable for agriculture. So class 1 is really the good stuff. And what percent of Canada's total do you think is in Ontario? What percent? 17%? Pardon me? 75, okay. Wide range there. So it's actually around 50%. I think you were just going to say that, weren't you? Yeah, about 50%. And of course, a lot of that is in southwestern Ontario and down the Golden Horseshoe. And you know what's happening down there. We're losing a lot of that because it's also good land for development. So that's another one of the challenges we have with soil. How many living organisms per 1 teaspoon of soil? And Mike, you know because you've counted them all. So you can't answer. Lots, millions. 1 billion. 1 billion. Okay, did you watch this earlier? And I don't know. Nobody's counted this, and they don't know exactly. But you know what? The bottom line is there is a lot. And we probably haven't even been able to measure all of them that are there yet. So phenomenal amount that's in a very small amount of soil. That stuff, as somebody said earlier, soil is alive. How many tons of soil can one single earthworm digest through its system in a year? Notice right away the answer is in tons. That tells you, wow. Okay. And as was said earlier this morning, they work 24/7. So how many tons? I hear 8. What? Did you say 36? Come on. So researcher Ruth, yes, who was a classmate of mine and is much brighter than I am. Thank you that you're here today, Ruth. It is 36 tons. Isn't that phenomenal? So if you think about the fact that approximately 10 tons of soil would be about the thickness of a coin over an acre, that puts that in perspective. That's a lot of chewing that they do. How much water can an additional 1% organic matter hold? And you heard this morning. Okay, you saw this morning. My answer is a little different. I have an Ontario answer that was done through a project, but obviously it varies by soil type and area and so on. What were you going to say? 25,000 gallons. Okay, and we're going to give you a yes on that. Different, as I said, than the answer I had for Ontario. I've heard higher numbers than 25. Somebody once claimed it was 40,000. Either way, it's a lot. So if we go with this number here, that is a half-inch acre. So in other words, an additional half inch of rain over an acre of land. You think of the benefit of that with the storms we're getting these days, that's huge. So adding more organic matter, adding an increased percentage of organic matter in your soil has many, many benefits, but one of them is right here, is this being able to hold out water. Maximum annual soil loss that can be considered sustainable. So we lose soil no matter what. You can lose it. It's airborne. You can lose it through erosion. There's many different ways. And there is a level that's considered, it's debated, but it's considered to be somewhat sustainable because at the same time we're adding residue and we're building some organic matter. Any guess? What do you think that number is in tons per acre? I hear 4. Yeah, it's generally around 3 tons per acre. Again, this is debated. Some say there shouldn't be any soil loss, but we know it does happen. At least at this number, we're not necessarily declining in terms of organic matter in soil. But in Ontario, the average is probably somewhere around 6 as to what's actually happening. So we're losing more soil than we're gaining. Yes?
Does that mean every year you're adding more than 3 tons per acre of some sort of soil?
So the comment being, if it's 3 is sustainable, that means that you're adding 3 in one form or another, and that's probably true to some extent. Again, these are really general numbers, but it takes a long time to generate that. It doesn't happen quickly, but we're building a lot of residues back in, and you've got biological life working and so on. Yeah.
Then why would this be equated to sustainable if it's losing?
And that's the whole debate. Yep. You just identified the whole debate.
Isn't that a wrong definition of sustainable? It's not a debate.
Are you Ruth's sister? Just checking. I love it. You're exactly right. And think along that lines. That's good stuff. But I got to leave it there to carry on for now. So that was just a little teaser for you. And I can see we've got a bright group here, and I'm glad to hear that. What I want to do now is just, and again, this builds nicely on what we heard this morning, is just make you aware of something that the province, so I do work for the Ministry of Agriculture, and we've been doing some work, not just ourselves, but with a lot of organizations on the whole area of soil, and there's an initiative that I want to make you aware of that I think is pretty exciting. So it's called New Horizons, and as Phil said in the introduction, it's the Ontario Soil Health and Agriculture Soil Health and Conservation Strategy. So let's walk through a bit of that. First of all, I think it's important, we throw the term soil health around a lot, and what do we mean when we say soil health? There's various definitions. There's the U.S. have a definition. This is the Fed's definition, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. They talk about it in terms of the soil's fitness to be able to support crop growth. So there's various definitions that go around, and probably over time we'll settle more on a definition we all agree on. But this whole idea of soil health, you have to think, what are we talking about? Because if you look at these two soils, and I know you won't be able to see it terribly clear from the back, but if you were making a guess, which soil would you say looks more like a healthier soil? The one on the left or the one on the right? How many think the one on the left would appear to be a healthier soil? Hands up. How many think the one on the right? Okay. And I would agree with you. You look at that, boy, I can see some good, lots of root hair, some good color, good root penetration. That just looks like a great soil. This one here, I can see obvious signs of compaction. There's uneven emergence, all kinds of issues. However, if you take a standard soil test to compare these two, the soil test will come back and say that on the right is the better soil, strictly because of fertility. So that's been our narrow-mindedness in the past in terms of how we identifying a healthy soil is mostly around the chemical component and fertility, and we can't stay there because there's a bigger picture. So why do we need a soil strategy? And I won't go through all of this. There's many reasons for it, but one I will say is, as a ministry, we got our butts kicked a few years ago by the Environment Commissioner. And he came and said, you know what, OMAFRA, you're not continuing to do research. You're not continuing to support activities around soil health. You're not hiring staff who are pedologists. Our soil surveys are falling behind, and he was right. And so, yes, thank you. At the time, it was she. Actually, it was he at the time, and at the time now it's she. Yes. So, it's just like the soil biology. We're all in this together. So really, though, we got handed a message that we've got to do some things and do them soon. And so that started the ball rolling towards some work around this whole area of soil health. But you look at some things, and these next photos you're going to see are local. Okay, I didn't pull them off the internet somewhere. These were taken from my vehicle within an hour of here. Okay, so this is not an unusual site. We think of the summer we had and the rains we had this past year. It was a tough one. Okay, you didn't have to go far to get any pictures like this. Same with this. There's a good example of sheet erosion in a neighboring county. This one I took just east of here in Simcoe County. I had to pull the vehicle over because it was extremely treacherous driving due to the wind erosion. Soil blowing across the highway, and so that's another issue. This one, I will admit, is not local, okay? And no offense to green tractors, but anyhow, compaction is another tremendous challenge. Yeah. Now here, these next three slides are taken in Lambton County, okay, so a little southwest of us here. But I find this interesting. This is a farm, so we've got an outline of a farm here. Back in 1955, this farm had 20 fields. 63% of that was cropped, 25% was pasture, and about 10% forested. Jump ahead a quarter century, we're at 1978 now, we're down now to 10 fields. We're down now to pasture of 1%, and the forest is also declining. Now we go ahead another 25 years to 2006. Other than 1% in pasture, a small segment here and around the farmyard, we have one field. So that's a very dramatic change, and even though that's over 50 years or so, that's pretty quick. And this isn't an unusual scenario. You know what's happening in the countryside. So that changing landscape is putting pressure on our soil, tremendous pressure. This here, if we can get this to work, I took this driving 2 winters ago, and again, it was actually a little treacherous, so I pulled my vehicle over and just started taking some video. And this would be what we refer to as snert, which is snow and dirt moving together. We call it snert. And it was quite interesting because you had a tilled field on one side, and the other side, look at the beautiful topsoil that farmer's being given. And it gets better because there was a bit of a living crop in that field. So as you moved across here, it's not so clear from the photo, but actually the problem stopped. But we actually took some measurements on snert to see what is that product that's moving over. What we found is that organic matter content was 9.3%. Phosphate content was 48 parts per million, and the potassium was 208 parts per million. So when that is happening, you're losing the best soil, the most important part of your soil, and you're giving it to your neighbor. So that's another problem. Urbanization, I referred to that already. That's a challenge. Another local one here. So do you remember June 23rd, 2017? If you live in the Harriston area, you certainly remember it. Close to 7 inches of rain in a few hours. That was a real challenge. Here's another video clip. This is taken from a drone, and this is courtesy of the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority. What's interesting about this is that you'll see 3 farm fields in a row. And 2 of the 3 producers agreed to work with the Conservation Authority on some soil erosion projects. The first landowner did not want to do anything. And so as you see this video, just keep that in mind. You'll see the difference between what's happening on those 3 fields. So we start in the first field here, and this is shortly after the rainstorm. And it's just, to me, it really makes a point of the benefit of not only erosion control practices, but in some cases erosion control structures as well. And so we've got waters obviously all over the field here. Now we've got a nice controlled pathway going down the field. So just, again, a small little picture that I think really shows how practices can make a difference. So all that to say, yes, I think we need a soil strategy moving forward to pull everybody together to say, how are we going to get this done? And the key thing is this is an initiative of OMAFRA, but it's not ours to own. All these organizations and many others have been a part of this and will continue to be, and this is something that we're all doing together. Yeah, we're sort of keeping the ball going, but it is very much a collaborative effort, which makes me feel really good about where it's going to go. In that concept of collaboration, there is what's called a technical working group, okay? And all these agencies have representatives on that working group. So for the last couple of years, they've been meeting, strategizing, saying, how are we going to put this together? What are the key initiatives? What are the key priorities? And so they've really been doing a great job and continue to do that. I won't go through all this other than to say it's a couple of years in the works, and as of where it's at right now, we had the final feedback time as of December 31st of 2017. I know a number of you in this room have contributed to that and given feedback, your thoughts on the document. We appreciate that. And we have been fast-tracking it to try and get it moved through this spring, ideally early in March. So at this point, there's staff in our head office in Guelph who are going through all of the feedback and adjusting this document to make sense out of it. I show this to say this is kind of the overall of the strategy, what they came up with, and basically there's 4 areas. So as I wrap up here, I'm just going to go through those 4 theme areas of the actual strategy so that you know what they are. The first theme area is the area near and dear to farmers' hearts, and that's soil management, because you are the soil managers. So this is where we look at the soil-related best management practices, and you heard about some of those this morning. Sarah referred to many of them. What are the barriers to adoption? Today, I'm preaching to the choir, frankly. But there's a lot of farmers out there that aren't listening or don't have time or aren't interested. So how do we reach out to others with those critical best management practices? What are the tools that are needed to make sure we have the right best management practices? Doing assessments, compaction is a huge problem, linking it all to climate change. So that's really this whole area of soil management. What are the practices that we need? What are the site-specific conditions for those practices? And we need to study that further. Second area is around soil data and mapping. Key piece of data we have right now is this right here. As you may recognize as, this is the Grey County soil map. Portion of it, and this one says 1953. So is that wrong information? No, absolutely not. But is there more that we need to have than a piece of paper with this large-scale data? Yeah, we need a lot more. Precision agriculture, everything that's going on, there's needed information that is accessible, so you folks, when you rent a property and you want to go and know what's the soil type, what's the drainage, what are the details, you can access that information. So a lot of work has to be done. And the first thing that we've started already is we've hired some podologists who are right now well, probably not right now, but they are continuing through the winter. In the Ottawa area, in the Peterborough area, plans to do some work in the north and in the Grand River watershed around soil survey. So literally, digging holes, making pits, testing, measuring, looking at soil layers, and identifying soil surveys in a more precise way. So that's a key part of this, is the whole area of data and mapping, remote sensing, LiDAR, all of those new technologies, building that together so that we can get excellent data in a form that is available publicly for you folks to use. So that one, everybody kind of knew it had to happen, and so it's already been in the works regardless of what happens with the strategy. The third area is the area of evaluation and monitoring. So if we're talking about soil health, well, how do we measure it? How healthy is our soil in Ontario right now? Well, we have some ideas, but we really don't have good data and good measurement on that. And as I showed you in the beginning, it needs to be more than just a soil fertility test. So soil health tests, you know, the Cornell test in the US, we've been working on modifying that for Ontario, and other soil health tests. There's an on-farm test that you can do as a farmer yourself. There's laboratories that are working on doing carbon tests and others. But we've got to pull all that together so that there's sort of geographic specific testing that is available on a reasonable price. Organic matter targets, you know, if you have a clay loam soil, what should your organic matter percentage be? Setting some ideas for here's the bar we're shooting for. Things like soil plots around Ontario that are permanent, so not just doing you know, short-term research in this location and then moving here, but can we get some plots in place that are done repetitively, long-term, so we get the data that we need? That's the type of information that comes in here. And we've done a little bit of work around research. We've pulled together a lot of researchers across the country, as well as Ontario-wide, to say, what are the critical areas of research that's needed around soil health? So that work has already started. The final area is the area around soil knowledge and innovation. And I think back, so I was at Guelph in the 80s at the university there with Ruth. And Ruth, remember, we could have chosen to take soil science as a major back then. That was offered as an alternative. But a few short years after we finished, that was no longer an option. So now there's a soil science course, but there's very little emphasis on soil science. And that probably flows through further to secondary school and public school and beyond. So this whole area of education, whether it's Forage, junior farmers, whether it's academic institutions, whether it's within government, we realize we've got to put a lot more emphasis on education. We've got to bring back the soil science and the technology that is needed to keep that as a front burner item. And then beyond that, down to the farm level, farm scale research. That was mentioned again this morning. That's critical. Information hubs and, you know, peer-to-peer learning. There's a whole variety of things in here. And even, I think, understanding that behavioral science aspect of how do different people learn? How do we reach people that are not listening or not interested or whatever? So there's a lot of elements to this, but the whole area of knowledge and innovation, I think, is a key one. So basically, where does it go from here? As I said, we've received the comments. We've got a lot of great feedback. We're trying to build that into the final strategy. Look for it this spring to be released. And it is a long-term document. It's not a 2 or 3 year, but it's until 2030 at this point in time. So stay tuned. Hopefully we get it passed through this spring. And then from there comes the important part, which is walking it out, pulling everybody together, getting them to do their part, getting the dollars for the research and the funding, and so on. Okay? I'm going to stop there. Do we have time for questions, Lori? Okay. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to entertain them.
Maybe question/comment. One, are you going to be doing this talk tomorrow at Crops Day? Because I think that's the audience that really needs to hear it. Good, awesome. And the other one, just feedback to OMAFRA. I was really disappointed to see that the actual numbers describing the problem were lost in this latest version of the draft soil health strategy. I think we actually need to have in there a precise statement of the problem, and that the numbers were brought up earlier today. 82% of soil in Ontario losing organic matter, 54% at serious risk of erosion. If those numbers aren't in the document, how are we going to know in 2030 whether we've taken any movement to improving that? And I think besides clearly stating what the problem is, we also need to have really ambitious targets about where do we want to be in 2030? Like, we all know we want it to be better, but that's kind of useless. Like, I want precise numbers about by 2030, our erosion risk is down to this, and our soil organic matter isn't decreasing anymore. We need to have an ambitious target that we're actually increasing it across the province. It's okay then if we don't get to those targets, because if they're really ambitious targets, even if we only get halfway, we'll have made real progress. And I think we need to stop being afraid of failure and setting the bar low, and we need to start setting the bar as high as we can imagine so we actually get movement forward. And like, we don't have time to wait until 2030 to see if it worked and then we'll try it again. This needs to happen now.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent comments. I will say, in terms of the numbers that you mentioned, so the 54%, the 82%, those are from Ag Canada, the part of what they call the agri-environmental indicators that they do an assessment on every year. They are, as you're right, they were in earlier iterations, some of the background work, soil matters, they were in that. So they're still there. They're inherent with this. So I appreciate your comment. They won't fall by the wayside, though, because we're working very closely with Ag Canada on this and very aware of those numbers. But your other comment, we heard that across Ontario. So we did open houses across Ontario, actually, in November and December. And that was a comment we heard quite a bit was, you know what, this is a great document. What you've laid out is great. Make sure you do it. So appreciate that.
So thank you, Andrew, for the very humorous comments and for taking the courage to stand in front of a group and in terms of explaining this process. And my own personal biases in terms of where I see gaps, I don't want to highlight, but I want to say that this is a critical, moral, ethical issue of our time, and it really needs immediate attention. Mm-hmm. And agriculture, as an industry, as a ministry, as a community, cannot do it alone. So where are the opportunities for communities like this to continue alongside whatever the agriculture ministry or inter-ministry agencies are doing? What are the opportunities, and where is the invitation to create those innovations at a grassroots level? Yeah. What can we do?
That's a very, very good question, and obviously, primarily this has been fed out through the ag groups. That's who the common stakeholders are, and so conservation authorities, various different agriculture groups have been. We did, and I haven't seen all of the feedback, obviously, but there was some good input from a number of other organizations as well, but probably not as much as we would like, and I think your point is valid, that we've got to step out of the boundaries. We as OMAFRA, we as an ag industry, I think we all need to step out of our boundaries a little bit and realize that the general public, for one, is very concerned about soil, is very concerned about food production and food security. There are many related issues to this. Climate change relates to this. You know, there's so many things that are all connected on this. So soil is not just this silo of a thing that relates to conventional farmers or, you know, cash crop production. It's across the board. So I don't know what those answers are right now and which groups we should go to, and please, if you have suggestions, do pass those along, because I think your point is very valid. We have to reach out broader than ourselves.
Well, it's not a technological fix. It's a social transformation. And it's much broader than even thinking of agriculture as an industry. It's a natural capital resource base of our children and their children. Absolutely.
Did anybody get to hear David Montgomery when he was here in Ontario speaking? He's written a very interesting book on, what is it called? Soil, the Erosion of Civilization? Dirt, the Erosion of Civilization, yeah. If you get a chance, that is an excellent book to read. And he was in the Sarnia area and also down Huron County, yeah. And I know it was sold out because a lot of interest in that. And it's very interesting when you get the concept of what's happened to civilization because of soil. One more question?
Last one.
Thank you. I've been noticing in the phosphorus discussion that there seems to be a huge attempt to not touch the big elephant in the room, and that is corn, beans, wheat forever and ever, amen. Is this strategy broad enough, or is there a mechanism there that is actually exploring, for instance, what if we found out that perennial pastures would give us 0 phosphorus, or do something to water infiltration rates that would change water in our waterways or something like that? Do we have an openness to find some of the old solutions renewed?
Thanks, Gerald. Great question. And absolutely, I think we do. In fact, one of the things that the strategy is embedded in, it talks about, is forages, for example. I could have thrown up charts showing you the decline in forage production since the last census. Pasture and forage has dramatically reduced. So one of the things mentioned in the strategy is the idea of okay, can we look at expanding markets for forage? We've lost a lot of beef production. There's not that same local demand, but is there a way that we can push and encourage forage and pasture production for other reasons? Because we don't need to go back there. We know the benefits of forage production on soils. We know the benefits of windbreaks. We know the benefits of forests. So how do we build that into our production now? So I think, yes, there is definitely an openness there to include that, and it is specifically mentioned around looking at that. The scary thing is when we used to say corn was king, right? Well, corn is no longer king. It's now soybeans. Soybeans is the #1 crop in Ontario now, and it is the absolute worst crop in terms of building your soil. And so when you look at our rotations, you know, corn, beans, 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 corn, it's terrible. We've got numbers on that. We don't need to just say it anecdotally. We've got the numbers on that.
I'm encouraged to hear that you do understand that the market has something to do with it, and so that's going to be the other sacred cow. You know, presently the free market determines where we go because we have to go to the top. So we're going to have a big cow to slaughter there.
Yeah, so Gerald's comments there were just around the fact, the importance of the markets, that the markets do drive a lot of what happens in the countryside, and so that's got to be considered in this. And so, yeah, appreciate your comments, and I look forward to enjoying the rest of the day.